Welcome back to another episode of The Miles Driven. This time, by popular demand, it's the Porsche Cayman. So I've already done the Porsche Boxster guide. There's also buyer's guides for all generations of Boxster and Cayman on the channel. Okay, so if you want to check out a buyer's guide on any of them after this, you can find those after. But I know a lot of you said you did the Boxster best of every generation. When's the Cayman coming? When's the Cayman coming? Well, it's here. The trouble with the Cayman actually is that it is introduced slightly later on. There are a few more intricacies that I wanted to bring into this video that I didn't with the Boxster, because honestly, it's very difficult with different manufacturers. Sometimes the people that watch one manufacturer or an enthusiast of that particular brand don't want as many details. And so I run in through a load of details on it. People click off and they say, oh, it was too much. I got bored. Other manufacturers, Porsche is one of them, people want even more details than I could possibly fit into a reasonable length video. Really, I probably need to set aside a podcast episode to sort of go through just each and every model just over its production window to really go into some of the granular stuff that I know some of you want. I've tried to find a balance in this video. So we're going to cover off 987 generation first, then we're going to go 981, then we're going to go 781. 718. A lot of the prices for earlier ones, so sort of your 987 generation, your 987.1, 987.2, and especially the special editions of those particular chassis, they're pretty solid now in the marketplace. In fact, it's about 9 years ago, I think it was, Chris Harris, you'll know him from Top Gear or many other things that he does on YouTube. He drove a Cayman S. It had nothing but an aftermarket exhaust, nothing too ridiculous on it, just to sort of get a bit of extra from the exhaust noise and to add a couple of extra horsepower from the engine. And he said at the time, this is pretty much all of the car anyone would ever need. And since then, there hasn't really been a car that's come along and sort of offered something more that you could actually use on the road. And that's the critical point here, is that especially with the Cayman model, what you see Porsche do quite cleverly is they realized that fairly early on, they absolutely nailed the mid-engine, right horsepower, right balance, that the public that wanted something enthusiast-based, possibly not so worried about just having the badge. These were more people that were looking for something they could really sort of drive on the weekends. They were happy in the early Cayman S. And after that, you know, there were a few revisions that helped it, especially 987.2. But as we moved into the 981, they started to realize we are hitting the limits as to what people can enjoy on the road. Of course, you can always go faster, but enjoyment on the road, that's something, you know, especially with modern cars. You know, I drive some really new stuff and you think it's great, it's fast. Not a lot of fun to be had, because if I keep pressing down this right-hand pedal, I'm going to go into real license losing territory. Not here's your ticket, carry on with your day, license losing. And it's not hard. You know, the modern cars, especially when you look at the sports car end of things, the numbers have been pushed up and pushed up. And it really is Porsche and a few other brands that have realized actually horsepower isn't the metric that we really want to be pushing on for now. Finding better efficiency from the engine, finding better road handling, better manners on the road, being able to push that a little bit harder, and an enjoyment factor. That's really where we're all at. So anyway, let's jump straight into the models here. And we're going to go 987.1. The first cars produced are 2005, 2006. Okay, 2005. They'll all be either a 2006 or a 2007 model year, depending on where you are in the world here. But 2005 is really where things kick off. Production ends in 2008 and the model years end in 2008 for this .1 generation. If you're not familiar with the Porsche coding, just pre-facelift is the easy way of looking at it. So you've got your usual pre-facelift, like a lot of cars, pre-facelift and facelift. It's just .1 and .2 is the easy way to differentiate. Now, the base model here has a 2.7 litre flat six. It's an M97.20 coded engine. The S model pushes that up, keeps a flat six, 3.4 litres, M97.21. So those are your two codings for your engine. I've said this before a few times. I speak in brake horsepower because that's what's still used in the UK. However, Europe uses metric horsepower or PS, and the US use horsepower, HP. Those two are essentially the same when you sort of calculate them. Brake horsepower is always slightly lower, and I've had this a few times where people will comment and say, "Well, it's not that number; it's this one." And I'm like, "Nah, you're quoting metric horsepower." And to be fair, when I sold cars in the UK, we actually always quote PS. It's just an old term. People confuse them all the time, and it's just people say brake horsepower. Don't really think too much of it. But I know some of you that are really into the details will say, "Hold on a minute, that's a couple of horsepower off." So I will just add in. So it's 242 brake horsepower on the base Cayman. That's 245 horsepower and metric horsepower. Okay, so that's the slight differences we're going to be talking about. 2 or 3 brake horsepower across all of them. I'm going to stick with brake horsepower though, because just how I have always looked at cars, especially Porsche are not really known for this, but manufacturers, especially years ago, they were known for just edging the number up slightly. Now we actually live in a world where the numbers are edged down slightly, and when you stick them on a rolling road, they usually do better than the manufacturer says. But Porsche have been doing this for decades. I can't really remember a time when they weren't, and that was because they would always take the number that they got from, Arctic winter testing, Sahara desert testing, and say, "Oh, that's what it does in the most extreme circumstances. Okay, that's what we'll use for our PR stuff." Whereas other manufacturers might find a sort of damp, dewy morning around sort of 15, 18 degrees Celsius, perfect conditions about 6 a.m. and do their testing then. Each to their own. The Cayman S, that is 291 brake horsepower, 295 PS. I'll give you a quick overview. So 6.1, 0 to 62 mile an hour, or 0 to 100 kilometer time. That's on the Cayman. 5.4 on the Cayman S. That's both with the manual gearbox. If you go for the Tiptronic, it is slower. So this is the generation of cars. If you go for Tiptronic automatic, it's a bit slower. Okay. And once you move into the PDK era, these numbers reverse. But in these, that's probably why most people, people love manuals and they don't care that they're slower today. For the most part, that's why they sell GT3s with a manual gearbox, even though you could go faster around the track with a PDK. It's more fun to have it with a manual. But back in the day, they were actually faster. As long as you actually could nail the gear change, they were faster. And that's the era that we're talking in here. Weight, I'll give you in kilograms, 1,310 all the way up to 1,350 kilos for the Cayman, 1,340 to 1,395 for the Cayman S. The Cayman S, no real surprise that it's heavier. It's got a larger engine. Of these two, so this early batch of cars, the one that most people will want to choose, unless you are heavily budget confined, you're looking for something that you can thrash around a track, you've never ever had a fast car before, and this is going to be your introduction, any of those, you can look at the regular Cayman. Everyone else, Cayman S. And it isn't necessarily because the standard Cayman is in any way a poor vehicle. It's that the Cayman S, when it first came out, you have to think of where we were. Manufacturers had been sort of releasing better and better cars, and we're in the era of, the M3, BMW is sort of transitioning over from straight six to V8. You've got manufacturers who are chucking turbos at everything. Everyone is competing in the horsepower wars, and people are being pulled left, right, and centre who may have previously had a commitment and said, "No, I really enjoy this car. I'm going to stick with the manufacturer." Porsche are coming into that with a brand new model. The Boxster has been established. It's been around 7, so 7, 8 years by the time that the Cayman is coming out in the previous generation. In this generation, the Cayman is coming as an introductory model. So they have to do something. And a lot of people will say, well, it's just a Boxer with a hard roof. It really isn't. Porsche made sure that the two cars, despite sharing a platform and the majority of their componentry, they always made sure that the Cayman was just edged off, because they knew that the person that wanted to, say, just enjoy owning a convertible Porsche and get in at the entry-level price, they were going to go for a Boxster. The people that wanted something maybe had a slightly higher appreciation, and I'm not saying if you went for a Boxster you didn't, but if you look at the sort of numbers when these were new, people who are a bit more enthusiastic, they edged towards a Cayman. And so what Porsche did was they offered something in the S that they knew would be able to compete across the market. You really had to go huge horsepower, something turbocharged, something probably larger to get a lot quicker than this on the road. Of course, around a track, there's lots of cars that could be faster, but nothing today. And I'm talking from a fun factor here. If you're particularly tall, you'll fit in this generation. So I'm very tall, didn't really fit in the previous generation Boxster. I remember driving them several times. They used to come in fairly often on the trade when I was working at a prestige site. People usually would be trading something a bit bigger. They sort of had their fun in a convertible and they'd want to be moving on. And I never really liked it when they traded them in. They just always were a bit tight if you are particularly tall. But this generation, they managed to address it, and they've created, you can be sort of very tall and fit in there. You can be shorter and you'll fit just fine. There's not as much sort of shoulder room as some of you will like if you're a bit bigger, but sort of the majority of people, this generation is where they really found a mass market. And so the the S is just offering so many things that when we look at the later generations, the next generation of car, the iterations that come off of it, yet by the numbers, they're better. Technically, they're better. By enthusiasm, they're better. But from a pure driving standpoint, getting it down a road as quickly as you feel comfortable that you can do, especially if you're still in that entry point, maybe you've had a couple of quick hatchbacks before, maybe you've had a sports car here or there, but you're finally getting to a point where you think, I really want to sort of sharpen up my driving skills, and maybe the car after this will be something that's properly powerful. This is a car that will really hone your skills. Now, after the 981's introduction, so these two models, there are two special editions that will come in to sort of kick this car off before it goes into the Dot 2. These are the Cayman S Sport and the Cayman S Design Edition. I'm just going to talk about the Design Edition first. Really what the Design Edition was doing, it's built in 2007, all will be a 2008 model year, but 2007 and into 2008. Same horsepower as the regular S, same sort of figures across the way. Really what they were doing is sort of offering something a little bit designery. You got your own briefcase that matched the car. If you know the Porsche brand, this was the Porsche brand being Porsche. They realized, oh, there's a market here for sort of a special edition, 700 cars that we could knock out, and people will say, I got one that is a bit different as the car's being run out, and people are aware an updated model is about to come along. So this was sort of one of those, I'd usually say it's a run out special. Dealerships would usually see this as a run out special. There's a year left. We need to get the last few out the door before the new one comes in. What can we do? Paint and stickers and all these sort of things. But I'm not trying to talk it down too much, but it's not a particularly separate car from the regular ones. But it is, off to the side. And if you see one out there, it's a little bit nicer than the regular models. But really, we're talking about optional extras and a few things, say, color-wise, that you couldn't get on the regular model. The one from a PowerPoint that stands out is the Cayman S Sport model, 3.4 litre flat six, M97.22. So slightly different coding from the .21, 303 horsepower. Now, when I looked up this to see if there was a conversion, from what I can see, Porsche advertised it as 303 brake horsepower and 303 horsepower in the US. The metric also shows us 303. So my guess would be that it's 303 horsepower, metric horsepower, PS, and that in the brake horsepower, it's just never been converted. So it might be slightly lower than that. But to be honest, as I say, we're talking about a couple of horsepower here. Drops the 0 to 60 time marginally. I would probably say, really, in reality, no difference. Maybe if you're, a particularly quick driver, you might be able to get the sort of 0.1 that they quote possible, but there's a tiny bit of added weight that goes with this, about sort of 10 kilos over the standard model, mainly for some special edition equipment that you get. So it's a bit unfair of me because the amount of S's that would have been specified with options is very, very high. So the base S would be slightly lighter than this model, but this model has options that almost everyone would have put on their S. So in the real world, probably about the same weight. Okay. About 700 of those in both cases. So this is where we move into the 987.2 generation. Model years follow production years, so it's 2009 to 2012. The regular Cayman, that moves up to a 2.9 litre flat 6, coded MA1.20, and the Cayman S gets its 3.4 litre, so capacity stays the same, but an MA1.21 engine, 316 horsepower, or brake horsepower I should say, from the Cayman S, 261 brake horsepower from the regular Cayman. And with the facelift, lots of things change for these two cars. For a start, we move away from the Tiptronics. You can now, in the majority of markets, you can get PDK. Some markets you still can't, but for the majority, you're going to move and get PDK gearboxes. However, the manuals are still generally the one that people look out for the most. Okay. I should give a quick warning that the dog is here joining with me again. So if you can hear him licking himself or rustling around, I can see him moving in the corner. So I thought I would just give you an answer and quick let you know on that one. But a couple of key points from the used market here is that a lot of people will stretch a little bit to get themselves into the 0.2. And that's because, as I say, there is a buyer's guide on the channel. There's lots of things in there that you can sort of learn about, see that's common fault, see which are the ones that, engine-wise, which are the ones that are going to have the extra bit here or bit there that's going to sort of define your decision past just driving them. But because a lot of people are stretching, what you're actually seeing here is people that look at the base Cayman quite a lot. And that follows what happened when these cars were new. So in that first generation, yes, there were people that bought the Cayman, but a lot of people that just wanted to get into Porsche, they would generally, and at the time boxes were, for most markets, a little bit cheaper. So they would generally go into a Boxster. Cayman buyers, they had to sort of really want it, and a lot of them would sort of stretch to go into a Cayman S. The ones that couldn't and wanted a coupe for whatever reason, they bought the regular one. Now, what happens is that the people that have been in an S brand new are sort of saying to themselves, actually, the Cayman base model has moved up. I'll go and have a test drive of that. And because prices have moved up, I can probably do sort of similar payments and get myself into, it's not the Cayman S, but still enough for them to enjoy. People that were in the previous regular Cayman happily moved across because it was an upgrade on what they had had. And the Cayman S kind of loses out a little bit here. And now on the used market, what's happened is a lot of people will be looking at the early ones. They'll hear bad stories about them, or they think, I can stretch the budget a little bit more. And because of that, they end up looking at the regular Cayman on this model because it's got the 2.9 litre engine, seems kind of worthwhile for your money. And because of that, the Cayman S, it kind of gets looked off to the side just a little bit. I'm not going to say that true in every market, but I think it suffers from what most cars, this happens to loads of cars, whenever they have something that's been out that is just caught all the news headlines, it's fantastic, it's thunderous, it's captured sort of motoring enthusiasts from all across the globe. The follow-up act is almost nearly impossible to get right. And it's why some cars never get a follow-up act. They just come out, take all the headlines, and then the manufacturer says, okay, cool, we've done it. We don't need to do it again. Probably because it's cost them more than they were able to make from the car. Because while we all may love cars and be car enthusiasts and be willing to spend every extra penny that we have on getting a car, most people just want a mid-size SUV, and that's where the money is. So when it comes to the Cayman S, when you look at them on the used market, you may just find, because the regular Cayman does fairly well, holds its money pretty strongly, the Cayman S gets left in a bit of a weird place where it has to be more than the Cayman, but the Cayman's pushed up a little bit because a lot of people are looking at it and trying to stretch themselves out from the pre-facelift. So these two do get a bit sticky used price-wise. And actually, I was looking at the prices today compared to about 4 years ago. I was working for one of the classic car companies, and we'd see these come in every now and again. And the prices have been pretty much solid for 4 years, even with a little bit of mileage increase. So people that bought them 4 years ago, most cars, if you bought it 4 years ago, sort of the height of all the lockdowns, you probably would have seen a little bit of a drop in value across that time, unless you bought something very, very special. But the Cayman and the Boxster have kind of managed to hold on to their money in this particular sort of .2. And I think it's because people really wanted them previously, and that desire hasn't gone away. So just a few things to note now. There are two special editions that come out of the 987.2, and they are the Cayman S Black Edition and the Cayman R. Now, I'll come on to the Cayman R in just a second, but actually these two cars are both just as interesting as each other. I think the biggest trouble a lot of you will have is just finding one. And then once you've found one, owners do tend to want probably the money that they're worth. It's just the challenge is that with any Cayman, you always have the question of, at what point are you starting to look at a 911? Okay, because although they are they are different cars. You've got a mid-engine setup. You've got the car that Porsche kind of said is our fast road car. We're not trying to make it the supercar until the very, very last ones. The supercar is the 911. That's the one, if you want ultimate sports car, it's still classed by most people as a sports car, but there's no getting away from, a GT3 RS really is in supercar territory. It's taking on supercars. And so because of that, they're trying to always sort of fight this. Let's not cannibalize ourselves. Let's not, try and sort of keep the brand separate. But every now and again, they couldn't help themselves, Porsche being Porsche. And the Cayman gets this sort of pump up for this last, 2012, this 2011, 2012 production. The 3.4 litre flat six, the MA 1.21 goes in both of them, 330 PS metric horsepower, whatever. Again, in the UK, a few people will note it as 326, others note it as 330. So the R is the fastest, even though they've got the same horsepower, because it has a lot of lightweight stuff added to it, about 1,315 kilograms for its weight. Whereas the Black Edition and the regular Cayman, they're more up at sort of 1,360, 1,380. With options, you can probably get them just above 1,380 kilograms. So for that reason, you'll see on all the spec sheets, the R is going to be the fastest. It's roughly spec for spec, like for like, 55 kilograms lighter. Okay. But the R is like as special as you get in this generation of Cayman. And because of that, people start to ask quite a lot of money. And you look at the 911 market and you say, I could get sort of quite a reasonable 911 for what the R is. So I would say Cayman R buyers, if you're out there looking at this, you've got to be dedicated into this particular setup and say you would rather have sort of the more mid-engine setup, something that is the best of its generation, the best of this particular model, rather than being sort of off into the 911 range where it's so hard to say whether one's better or another because they're different. But most of the time on the used market, particularly on the new market, is a little bit different because you'll have people sort of buying out of desire, and sometimes they'll go into the dealership. I had this many a times when I was selling cars. People come in with a mindset of, I'm looking for one of these, but you've got one of these in the showroom, and people see it and they go, what would the numbers be on one of those? But what numbers were you looking for? And you work out a deal. Used market, then it goes either one or two ways for the cars like the Black Edition and the R. Either you're looking at collecting them, or you're looking at really sort of driving them. And I would say the thing that sort of holds the R and the Black Edition up a little bit is that you've kind of got more of the sort of collector market looking at these people that want to take them out, a few times a year maybe. Then they're not looking at this as a car they're going to, take out every single week, no matter what the weather. Because of that, it goes to a smaller bunch of people who all want the absolute best one. And of course, then sellers start to say they have the best one. And before you know it, you start to spend real, like a lot of money on one of these. So I would, if you were in that market, I'd strip it all the way back and I'd be looking at an early Cayman S. I know some people will say, well, reliability issues, IMS. If reliability scares you on these, if the early ones, they worry you so much, and you watch the buyer's guide on the channel and you say, they still scare me too much to be sure I'm getting something that I want, just go for a facelift one. Okay. That's your easy way of resolving this issue. go to the DFI engines, problem solved. Okay, that's the 987. Ultimate version, that's the ultimate version. But you've got to be pretty committed as a Cayman buyer to go for it, because as I say, you're stepping into some pretty nice 911 territory and newer 911 territories that may sort of pull some people out of these. So yeah, just a note on that one. Let's move on to the next generation, the 981. And I'll tell you a quick story for the 981, which is that despite everything I've said about the previous generation, the 981, I remember when I first laid eyes on one, years ago, it was over a decade ago now that these came out. I remember seeing it and saying, this is the generation. It was actually a Boxster that I saw. I said, this is the generation that starts to move buyers into Boxsters and Caymans who otherwise would have sort of stretched everything to get into a 911. This will be the generation. And it was just that when you looked at them coming down the road, whatever it was, they were a bit bigger. They were slightly more, I don't know how to put it, because the 911 was always a slightly larger car, they almost filled the boots of the 911 for those people that didn't really care about which particular Porsche that they had. They just wanted the badge on their driveway. And the numbers kind of followed this, especially because today we know the 981 is the end of naturally aspirated engines for the regular Caymans. After this, you've got to go up sort of GTSs and stuff like that to be able to get into a naturally aspirated engine. So the 981 is like the standout generation for those of you that say, yes, I want to have fun on the road, but I want to have some modern things, and I want people to look at it and still feel that that's quite a modern car. The trouble that the 987 falls into is that today on the road, as great as they do look like an older car. There's no getting away from it. Amongst all the sort of egg-shaped EVs with blinding lights and daylight running lights and everything else, and this sort of massive screen everywhere, whether you like that or not, it doesn't really matter. That's what people consider modern. And so when you put the previous generation Cayman next to them, it looks dated. This generation Cayman still can hold up. It doesn't have all of the latest and greatest, but because it has a lot of features that we still see on new cars, especially sort of more entry-level cars, it can sort of sit in the traffic jam. And if people don't know the age of it, I reckon, 7 or 8 out of 10 people who don't know anything about cars would say, oh, that's a nice car. Oh, that must be very, very expensive, because if it was clean, they would just guess it's brand new, So if that is a factor for you, stretch into a 981. As I say, I remember as I first saw one, I just thought, yeah, this one's going to make a difference. The previous one, they'd been clearly sort of trying to hold it underneath the 911 so that the people that came into the showroom and said, I might be able to stretch up to a 911 could say, well, this is what you get with a 911. This is what you get with a Cayman and a Boxster. We can take you in this direction or this direction. Here, they clearly are doing very, very well with the Boxster and Cayman model and say, let's grow them up a bit. Let's offer a little bit more to these buyers, because we expect quite a big number of the previous generation owners to turn up and get another one from us. And they're possibly not in a financial position where they're going to jump to the 911, especially because in this generation 911 that's following alongside the Cayman, prices really do move upwards. And across the whole sort of Porsche spectrum, prices are moving quite steeply upwards. So they know they're going to have to retain some previous 911 owners with a 981. So when you see them, yeah. Aside from that, though, let's talk about what's actually in them. So an MA1.22 goes in the 2.7 litre. That's in the standard Cayman. 3.4 again, flat 6, MA1.23. That's in the Cayman S. 271 brake horsepower in the regular Cayman. 321 brake horsepower in the Cayman S. 0 to 60 times, this is where we start to sort of get really, really close between manuals and the PDKs. But if we say between 5.6 to 5.8, markets do change this slightly, by the way, only because a lot of markets just get a 0 to 60 quoted. Well, I say a lot of markets, the US gets 0 to 60 quoted. For Europe, we always get 0 to 62 miles an hour because it's the conversion of 0 to 100 kilometers an hour. And most of the world use 0 to 100 kilometers an hour. So because of that, you may see slightly difference between gearboxes and slight differences between markets. So just something to note. But what I will say on that, the Cayman S model for the first time dips under the 5-second marker. So the fastest gearbox and the quickest testing that they can do, 4.9 seconds. So as I say, previous generation sort of entry Carrera 911 owners might be looking at this at the time, especially if the 911 had sort of slipped out of their budget for whatever reason, or they were just interested in the mid-engined Cayman. But this was where they could sort of step over and say, I'm not going to be losing out a lot. These early ones, as I say, so you get a completely new platform, electric power steering. So if anyone did it right, it was Porsche. There's a few other manufacturers really sort of worked on it. BMW, I would note as well. There's a few manufacturers that just said our identity of our brand is so based around the feel behind the wheel that if we have to go to electric power steering, which is become sort of mandated, I think they could kind of see writing on the wall. You have to remember, a lot of car manufacturers, they're building things, or they're designing things 10 years in advance. So regulators, historically, up to very recently, were very clear with them about what they were going to be expecting. And it became obvious that hydraulic power steering was sort of out the window for everyone, but extremely low production vehicles that didn't have to worry too much about sort of some of the emissions testing, safety testing, all the other stuff that was going to come in. However, for all of the talk about it, having driven them, I'm not going to be critical here. And I think they did the electric power steering switch over very, very well. I think we get a bit hung up today on analog everything because everything's become so digitalized. It's like when I worked in classic cars, I remember I got into a 50-year-old MGB GT with a V8, quite a rare car. And I thought, God, this is amazing. Oh, it's fantastic. Oh, it sounds so, the whole thing's shaking, you know, and fantastic. Oh, I'm going to take up the road. Felt like I'm doing 150 miles an hour. I'm doing 27. And spoke to some people who were older than me, who'd been around them, you know, in period, and said, oh yeah, they're rubbish, aren't they? I was like, oh no, it was fantastic. He said, yeah, that's because you drove it for 5 minutes. Okay, it was longer than that, but they made their point. And you weren't thinking of owning it. You were just thinking of it as an experience. And we do that a lot. We look at what is completely analog and old-fashioned, and we say, oh, it'd be really nice to have that. Oh yeah, it'd be so much better than what I have here. And then if you had to live with it, and let's say especially on these older cars, some of the reliability issues, you'd say, actually, as much as I want the analog, I quite enjoy what I have, and I don't really want to go back to it. And as I say, so here, I think a lot of people will say, oh yeah, but the analog is a bit purer and you can just feel that bit more. And yes, if you're absolutely going for it around a track, you know, maybe so. But for the majority of you, I wouldn't worry too much, and I would not let it put me off going into a 981. So that covers off, I think I did mention model years, but they're built in 2012 for the very first ones, but it will be model year 2013, and depending on where you are in the world will dictate when you get your first deliveries. They're built until 2016, and the model year continues until 2016. Really, what happens is they start to bring out, and I would say start to stretch the legs of the idea that the Cayman is going to be allowed finally to sort of step up and butt heads a little bit with the big boys of the 911. So you have a GTS model that comes out in 2014. It's a 2015 model year vehicle. It's built in 2014 or from 2014, and it continues until 2016. 3.4 litre MA1.23 engine, 335 brake horsepower, and we dip properly into the under 5 seconds, so 4.6 0 to 62 time. Okay, slight change on the weight of it, but not huge. Start to add a lot of specification in. They're not limited in number, so if people have a GTS and they're selling it and they say, oh, this is, you know, limited to only this number, no, that Porsche never limited the sales of this year, of this model GTS. But obviously they did only sell a finite number of them, and some people will sort of take that and say, oh, well, I've got the one that's red, and because it was of this production run, it's only one of, don't worry about it. Don't pay extra for that. Not on this car. It's not the case. Okay. Is there anything big to mention? I don't think. For me, the GTS of this Cayman, I think I'll bring this up on the guide. It's the one because there's 5 models. I'll go into the other 2 in a second. In total, it's the one in the middle, and it's the one I'd actually look at buying as long as I can get a deal on, because it steps things up a little bit from the S. It is, I'd say, the sort of enthusiast buyer's car, but you're not paying the premium once you step up, sort of GT4. Okay, so. Of course, there's always going to be something you can step up to next, and I'll talk about the GT4 in just a second. But critically, you're paying, you're paying more for a GTS than an S, but because it's got the S engine, all these things, people don't have this huge value on it, even though the actual changes across the vehicle will make it faster if you're going around a track, and it is that little bit lighter and everything else. So. For that reason, for me, it's quite a pick. But because it doesn't have a special engine, or it wasn't a limited run car or things like that, it manages to fall into a slightly soft area residual value wise. So if you're looking at a 981, this is the one that's a pick for me. However, I have to talk about the GT4, don't I? So 2015, 2016, so we're sort of deep into the end point of the 981. 3.8 litre, flat 6, a 9A1 based engine, 385 brake horsepower, 4.4, up to quoted 4.7, 0 to 62 time. Okay, about the same weight actually as the GTS. 1340 kilograms will probably be the lightest you'll get. So it can be, and it will be, like for like, it will be lighter than a GTS, but if you find a GTS with no optional extras, it'll be quite close to what the lowest end of a Cayman GT4 is. But even the highest spec with everything added to it, GT4 will only go up to 1375 kilograms. So you just can't, you can't get down to the number of the GT4 without having a GT4. So if speed over everything else is important to you, that's where the GT4 starts to really make sense and starts to be worth the extra that it's charged for. There's a few reasons for that. It's not so, unlike say a limited run car that's say 1 of 700. That's not what happens with a GT4. Porsche are only going to build so many of them. They allocate the sales to dealers, so dealers are only going to get so many to sell. So they are limited, and quite limited, on the used market and for sale when they were new. It's the first GT variant of a Cayman. Okay, so because of all these things, you do find people want a fair old bit of money for them. And when you start to look at the money that they are, so I'll be critical about it for a second, because I think once you've got to this end, you're sort of really at the sharp end where people will say, oh, it's just a fantastic car in every single way. They're pretty long geared. Okay, if you're trying to enjoy them on the road, they are pretty long geared. Making the most of that, if you live in an area of the world that isn't, full of open, sweeping corners and so deserted that no law enforcement is ever going to visit there, and you're confident that you're only going to hurt yourself if anything goes wrong, then yeah, okay, you can really stretch its legs. Everyone else, I think second gear goes up to like 82 miles per hour, something like that. It's really long geared. I remember thinking at the time, it's just you're going, and that's really fun. But you have to be careful. When I said on the first one, the 987, is you're having a lot of fun on the road, and that's because you're thrashing your way along. You're stepping into license losing territory, but you're sort of managing to. Well, the car is sort of saying, I can't keep throwing you like this. You're going to have to control me to get the best of me, and because of that, speed numbers come down a bit, if you get flashed, then you're likely to get a telling off, but nothing worse. GT4 land, you are in real trouble. And so unless this is going to be specifically for track purposes, you love going to the track on a weekend, you live close to one, that's where a GT4 really starts to make sense. If you're a collector, I know collectors always get a bad rap, but at the end of the day, if you love cars and you just want to have lots of them, there's nothing wrong with that. It's certainly better than spending your money on some other nonsense that we can do in life. So because it's the first time they do GT, so GT4, it's the first sort of a lot of special things happening to the Cayman. And because, yes, it was sort of deallocated, limited for sales, they will hold their value most likely. Obviously, never say never, but from the collector side, I can see why people would want them. And I think ultimately, over time, you're going to see two types of GT4 appear on the used market. You're going to have this one, which has clearly been used and, for its purpose, and it will hold up to it because if it's got a GT4 badge on the back from Porsche, they're saying you can do every single one of your miles in this thing on a track. It will last. It will do it. So I wouldn't worry about buying one. I'd just check someone's taking care of it, every time they come off the track. On the other side, you're going to have near perfect, very low mileage, maybe been taken to car shows, the odd sort of fast road use here and there, maybe, but people that are sort of keeping them as their nice car, sort of show off to friends and whatever else. And there's nothing wrong with that. But, depending on who you are and what you want the vehicle for, I think we'll see these two sort of markets for GT4. And of course, the ones that have been used and really used on track, they're going to be sort of a bit lower down here. The sort of box fresh, perfect ones are going to sort of stay at a certain level. However, as we'll move on to in a moment, there is a later GT4, and the introduction of that car, I would say if I was a collector, I'd be looking at the GT4 that comes after this one, the next generation, rather than this one. This one is just a fantastic track car. Collector, yes, because it's a GT, it's the first of the GTs, but ultimately what comes afterwards is better by sort of all the metrics, really. Still very long geared, but I'll get onto that in a moment. And if all of this is a bit too much for you and you're thinking, I just want a special edition one or just something that's a bit different to the regular ones on the 981, there is a black edition again. So this is 2015 built, going into 2016. It's 2016 model year. Has the 2.7 litre engine to the MA1.22, 271 horsepower, mid fives for its 0-60 time. It's not numbered, or anything like that, but it is obviously fairly limited because there weren't that many sales going on. And this is really sort of a run out goodbye to the 981. Lots of added equipment, so PCM, 20-inch wheels, has Bose sound system in a lot of markets, gets obviously lots of black accents, all these sort of bits. It's the one that I'd say if you're watching this and, you like cars, but you're not an absolute car nut, you like to go to a couple of car shows a year, and if you've got the spare time, you'll go and spend a bit of time on a car for them, but you're not someone that their life revolves around a car, then this is the one that's probably for you, because 270 horsepower isn't to be sniffed at, okay? Having the one that's a special edition that you can enjoy on the road, 2.7 litre engine, so it's naturally aspirated, so that's something fairly unique today. It has lots and lots of optional extras, so you're kind of getting the best of the base. And if, you're not someone that says, oh, I want all the spoilers and the big bits and all this sort of stuff, if you're not that person, you can just admit it to yourself and say, I just want a nicer version, something that stands out, that's going to be a little bit special, that's just going to set me apart from, another enthusiast comes by and they go, oh, you got the black edition one. Oh, yeah, okay. Oh, I see the point. Oh, yeah, I see. Oh, you've got this. If you're that person, yeah. Everyone else, I think it's GTS. GTS is the sort of pick that I would say. I appreciate some people like the S and they like the base model. And if you're just trying to sort of get into one of these and enjoy it, just get a regular base. But if it's all about, most value for money, I think that's the GTS does that. I mentioned this previously. There's a good channel, Everyday Driver. They also have a podcast. Paul, I think it is, on there. He had one of these GTSs, and so you can watch a few of their videos, and he talks about the car very kindly, of course, because he bought one. But he has then moved himself on to GT4, I think, later model 7181. So the point being that the people that kind of know their cars, who didn't have infinite budget, which is almost everyone that works in the car industry, aside from sort of one or two people, I think they would be looking at a GTS model. If you're just sort of casual enthusiast, I'd probably look at a black edition if it was in budget. And then I say the S for people who want to have something that's a bit of fun. GT4 really sort of those people that either have to have the best, have to collect something, or actually genuinely are going to be using this car for its intended purpose. That's the 981 generation. Let's move on to the 718. And so we move into the, well, I don't know how to put it really. The 718 will be the last generation of the Cayman as we know it, because we know there's going to be an electric one that follows it up, but Porsche seem to have, I don't know if they've fully changed their mind. I don't think they've fully changed it. I think we will see another combustion engined Cayman, but I think it's not going to be for the, probably will be the sort of entry models will be electric, and then the sort of very top model will come with something like a 4-litre again. But I don't know that they're going to do like a hybrid sort of regular Boxster. I think in the 718, we're looking at the last time you're looking at a sort of combustion driven only Boxster and Cayman. Could be wrong. Hope I am in some ways, because I think there's a lot more to be had from this particular specification of car. I think the people left that will spend their hard-earned money on a sports car have sort of drifted to Porsche, Caymans and Boxsters, and it'll be a bit sad if everyone that can't afford the absolute top is sort of priced out of having a combustion engine. But we will wait and see. So I know there's a lot of people that are big fans of the sort of EVs and EV sports cars, but the market seems to say that isn't the number that people thought it would be. Anyway, in this generation, we have a lot of variations, partly because of how long the model exists. So 2016 is when your sort of very first ones come out, and they run all the way to 2025. In there, so I think it's a 718. I mentioned it about the 981. I think it's a 781 where I kind of say there is an update, there is a facelift, but there isn't a traditional facelift. The car doesn't particularly change from the outside, but it does have some minor updates throughout the years. Okay, and that is Porsche themselves saying that. It's not that there is a cut line of, say, 2020 onwards, these are the dot twos. They don't do that, but they do start to. I think what I confused in the guides was I said the T was essentially a facelift, which it isn't. The T really sort of says we understand the market for the base model has kind of disappeared over the years because this reason, that reason, turbocharging 2 litres, blah, blah, blah. So we're going to bring in an entry T instead for most markets, and you can insist on buying the base model, but really, most people are trying to sort of aim in the direction of a T model. So I think that's kind of what I might have missed out in the guide. Not a big deal, but it was Porsche themselves that said they were updating the 718 throughout the years. So is the 2016 exactly the same as the 2025? I would say not exactly. And that actually, I mean, some of that is mandatory updates. In Europe, for example, 2018 for 2019 model year, you have to have OPF or GPF or PPF. So the gas particulate filters have to be in the exhaust of European models. So that's an obvious change between, say, a 2024 car and a 2016 car. In the US, you don't have those filters, so you'll have probably a bit of a better exhaust noise, I would say. But overall, manufacturers dealt with that pretty well. Yes, they're a bit quieter, but it's just something to be aware of, that there are some changes that have to happen through, mainly because of regulation. And this is why I said earlier, historically, manufacturers got sort of a 10-year heads up. Look, we're looking to have this sort of target in 10 years, and then they could build their cars, they could target their engineers to say, it has to be this within 10 years. And more recently, regulators just went a bit wild from 2018, 19, and they suddenly wanted everything done within 3 years. And I think that was an issue of no one's an engineer, or it didn't appear that there were any engineers in the room when the regulation was made. They went and told car companies, who then said, you understand that's probably not possible, but we will try our best, hoping that there would be sort of a, well, that's the target. And then we're told, no, that's the absolute law. It's going to change, which then has had to be walked back. So, if you ever sit there and think, oh, what is happening with the car world? What is happening with the car market? Why is everyone having to do this or that? At least 50% of it is not their decision. I'm telling you that now. So anyway, bit beside the point of the car. 2-litre turbo, it's coded MA2.20, 296 brake horsepower. It's a turbocharged engine, 5.1 seconds to 0 to 62. No restriction of the base model from a sales point of view. And it moves pricing up a little bit. Was it the right decision to come out in this way? I think initially, actually, because a lot of people are critical here, but initially, this 2-litre engine did sort of okay. Didn't do amazingly. It wasn't setting, records anywhere. It wasn't sort of lighting up journalists glowing about it. Nothing like that was happening. But for people that were just interested in going, because here the Cayman in the 718, and I think we saw this in the 981, the Cayman actually starts to be priced a bit cheaper than the Boxster, because for the most part, convertibles are generally more expensive than coupes. And I think it was just because the Boxster pricing was kind of established in the first generation where the Cayman didn't exist. In the second generation Boxster, the first generation Cayman, they wanted to sort of introduce the Cayman, and so they came in at a cheaper price point and then realised, actually, no, the Boxster should be the cheaper price point. So there's not loads in it, but it's just something to be aware of, that there was a market of people coming along and saying, yeah, I'm interested in one of your cars, not a huge car enthusiast, just want something nice. They've got an X amount to pay. And for those people, the 2-litre turbo was on the money, what they wanted. The trouble was, those buyers ran out pretty quickly, and the enthusiasts didn't, I wouldn't say they didn't exactly show up, but they didn't show up in the numbers that Porsche would have hoped. And in the Cayman S, it didn't really change things in the mind of enthusiasts. However, I'll be a bit controversial here. I think people harshly look at the turbo engines because they're 4 cylinders, they're not a 6 cylinder, they've lost the naturally aspirated aspect. Do you know what? Go and drive one. There's a good channel, Petrol Ped. He had a Boxster, sorry, a Cayman S, or he might have had a Boxster S. He had one of the S's anyway. I think it was a Boxster with a 2.5 turbo engine. So he had, this generation. And see what he said about it. I think he put a Miltech exhaust on it. That sort of gave it a bit of a fruity sound. And for the most part, when you're driving, yes, people will always be able to say, oh, it's not a 6-cylinder, oh, it's turbocharged, oh, it's this. And yes, that does change the way it drives. But if any company was going to do it right, it would be Porsche. And when you drive them, you have to say, it's a bit controversial now because people will say, oh, no, they're all rubbish. You need to go and get yourself a 4-litre. If money was no object. If money is no object, get yourself a GT4 RS, problem solved. But for the majority of you watching this, you'll think, maybe you want to stretch into a 718. Maybe you've had a 981 or you've got the 987, or you're looking at all of them and you just don't know where to move in. I would say, don't just sort of cancel out all the turbocharged 4 cylinders just because they're turbocharged 4 cylinders. They're still Boxer engines. They still have a noise that, it's more shared with a little bit Subaru-ish, but not too much. But it's still something unique, and 345 horsepower, or 350 horsepower, 345 brake horsepower, you're going to feel like you bought something that is a proper sports car, okay? This is from having driven them. Do I think that, you should avoid getting a 4-litre if you can because the 2.5 is so good? No. The 4-litre in all the models that it's fitted to is just something that I think the way you sometimes say it is like a parts bin car. So sometimes manufacturers don't necessarily need or think about making a car too much before it's built. So they'll sort of say, okay, we've planned it all out. We're going to release this one and this one and this one. And then they get a market reaction and they go, oh no, we need to rejig things. Well, let's put the engine out of this one and the gearbox out of this one, and we'll put that in this chassis with these bumpers, and we'll see if that sells. Those are generally the best cars that you can buy, because it's almost like someone who was allowed to, like a modifying car company had gone in to a proper manufacturer and been allowed to sort of mess around with things and tune things, all this sort of stuff, and turn everything up to 11. But then it had to be sort of dialed just in a little bit so that you could put a warranty on it and it was still reliable. And you kind of feel that when you get parts bin cars. And the 4-litre, I'm not saying it was entirely not planned, but, clearly Porsche had an idea of where things would go. And we'll talk about that in the GTS in just a second. And it didn't, the market didn't quite follow. Now, the T, I will talk about the T now rather than the GTS, although the GTS with the 2.5T comes out first. The T sticks with the 2 litre, so we'll just talk about that very quickly. So 2 litre turbo is the MA2.20 at 295 brake horsepower, 300 horsepower, 5.1, up to about 5.5 seconds, 0 to 60. So again, depending on where you are, depending on what the spec is, what weight the car is, but they are, that little bit more exciting than regular Boxster because of the lightweight options, because they sort of pushed the 2 litre to be more of a driver's car, short shifter, PASM, 20 mil ride height drop. You can see a Sport Chrono package as well. You can see what they've thought is, okay, the 2 litre isn't selling. We sort of sold it to the people that were just trying to get into a Porsche model. They may not be coming back, or they may get a Boxster or something. We need to do something with the Cayman. And so they say, let's give it the T treatment. Lighten it up, sharpen it up, give it more of a driver focus. It will probably, because of, weight of the engine and everything else, it will most likely be the lightest one you can buy, without going, let's say, into big money. But because it's got a smaller engine, engines are, it's hard to negate the weight of an engine. It just is. You can make a car fully out of carbon. If it's got a hunking great heavy engine in it, it's always going to have a penalty for it. So about 1,350 up to about 1,380 kilograms is what you're looking at in the T. If I compare that off to the S, for example, because on the used market, because the T is a bit newer, these will probably be comparable. You're looking at 1,380 up to about 420, 1,400, 1,420, 1,425 kilograms. So there is, a bit of a lighter car here, and the whole car is sort of built to be a bit sharper, a bit more, the T is always that car. It's like the driver's car. Do Porsche pull it off? Go and drive one. I would say if I was looking at this, I'd probably end up in a 2.5 turbo GTS, which is the one we'll talk about in just a second. But I'd end up in one of those over a T, because price-wise, you end up paying a bit more for a T because they're a bit newer. So unless having a newer car is important to you, it's probably a little bit more to get out of the GTS. But, that might be by the by for you. Who knows? So as many of you will know, there are 2 GTS models. There is the one that is built from 2017 to 2019, model years 2018, 2019, nice and simple. And then there's the one that comes in 2020. That one takes all of the limelight. That one got everyone excited, and we won't talk about it first, we'll talk about it second, because of that, people sort of just it just completely overshadows the 2.5 turbo 4-cylinder GTS model, 365 horsepower, 1,400 kilograms. So, it's not as light as a T. It's got a slightly bigger engine. They didn't go as hefty with all the weight saving stuff, but slightly more boost across the rev range. Got an exterior that sort of makes it stand out as a GTS. So if those things are important to you, that's what you get. It sort of bumps up specification a little bit over a standard 718. The GTS, for most of the Porsche range, that's the one that is the driver's one, but the T sort of confuses it here a little bit, only because the T has to do something with the 2 litre engine. I would say, again, what the GTS brings in this early year is probably a bit of a bargain, because anyone that's looking at a GTS knows there's a 4-litre. But the 2 years prior, when Porsche said, no, we're going to stick with the 2.5, and got a bit of backlash and listened to their customers, which is fair of the company. They heard what people were saying. Everyone, yes, they could have great torque and it could be fast, but they wanted a naturally aspirated engine, and so Porsche relented, and they bring in the 4-litre naturally aspirated engine. It's a 9A2 variant. It's 394 brake horsepower, 400 PS, although for the US, it's 394 horsepower. So the US does get a slight pullback, just a slight pullback in power versus a European model, and the UK model as well. It's just the way we, let's say, judge brake horsepower to horsepower. 4-second 0 to 60, that can push up to 4.5 depending on market. 2020 build, 2025 is when it ends production. But to be honest, I would say sort of 2023 and 2024, it becomes more difficult to get hold of these GTSs. And while they are still selling them, you can just see, their mind is looking off to the other models that have the 4-litre. So the 718 becomes quite a broad spectrum of cars because of the 4-litre engine, because they're trying to sort of bring in sharper models of the base models. You get all this, width across the across the models. If the budget stretches, 4-litre's a 4-litre. Yeah, naturally aspirated 4-litre. You can take everything I've said before and say, well, you kind of talked up the turbos there, and now you're talking up the 4-litre. The thing is that if you've driven a lot of cars, and if the driving experience is the most important aspect of why you are going to buy your next car, if this is something of like, you've got a plug-in hybrid SUV or whatever, and or you've got an electric car, and this is something to enjoy, and it's only to enjoy, get the 4-litre if you can afford it. If this is a car you're going to use every day, fuel economy is a bit more important, or you're not so bothered about spending the extra money that a GTS with a 4-litre is going to be, you can look at an S or a GTS 2.5 turbo, save a ton of money, bit better fuel economy, not a lot, but a bit, and let's say 4 seconds 0 to 60 in a 4-litre in the fastest gearbox and everything else, 4.1 on the GTS with the 2.5. So, there's not really a lot in it. It is, though, always going to have that kudos, well, you got the 4-litre. And if you get the 2.5, everyone will always say to you, oh, you got the 2.5. Oh, you could have got the 4-litre. So, because of that, it's always going to be a little bit of a pull. If you can resist that, I'd look at the 2.5. But as I say, the fact that this GTS model exists, I don't think it was supposed to exist. I think Porsche probably planned to put a 4-litre in. They were sort of like, yeah, we're going to have the hot variants with a 4-litre. But the GTS, I think they wanted to build a gap. 2-litre is your entry, 2.5 for your S and your GTS. And then if you're willing to really step up, then we go sort of GT4, we go to the 4-litre. I don't think they expected to put a stepping stone in there, but they did, and we can be happy for that. For a lot of you, as I say, just the consideration will really be, can you take the financial step up? Because the 4 litres will cost more. However, if we're looking 5 years, 10 years from now, that will probably be the one that people will really, really want, especially, if experience is more than just using the car day to day. And you've got to remember, new buyers, they were possibly looking at this as more of a day-to-day thing. This was going to be their car. It wasn't going to be something they purchased, put in the garage. Some people would have, but, it was more going to have to do some everyday stuff. And so the 4-litre at the time, it met a market demand in 2020, 2021. Obviously, we know what happens in those years. So then in 2022, it's a bit harder to get hold of. 2023, they start to sort of know they're going to be winding it down in time. And so depending on where you are, you may find it just, the supply just keeps the prices high. If you're willing to accept that because you're going to get a little bit more out on the back end, or you should do, when you come to sell, go for it. If not, just don't be down on the 2.5. Go and drive it. If you don't enjoy it, well, then spend the extra and get a 4-litre. Problem solved on that one. After that, though, things start to get very special. It's the GT4 and the GT4 RS. Now, for most of you who've had quick cars and who haven't had the fastest things are on the road, the GT4 is going to be an experience. The GT4 RS, if I said, on the previous generation, the GT4 is really for people that are going to use it on track, that's still true in this generation. I would say, if anything, if you wanted sort of a hardcore road car, you actually would look over at the Boxster and the Spider that they do, because that had slightly softer sprung suspension. It was a little bit more road bias. I think Porsche knew the majority of the buyers, they wanted something they could enjoy on the road with the Spider model. Whereas once you get into GT4, it becomes very, very track focused. And GT4 RS, I mean, you can drive it on the road if you want. It looks fantastic, but it's you probably wouldn't want to do a long journey on a particularly bumpy road on it. Let's put it that way. What are the figures? So 2019 is the start of the build for the GT4 2020 model year. That continues until 2024. Okay, GT4 RS, that begins building in 2022, comes out on the 2022 model year and continues until the very, very last in 2025. Both have the 4-litre engines, the 9A2 variants, although the RS gets the 9A2 Evo engine. Okay, so 414 brake horsepower in the GT4, 493 brake horsepower in the RS. And a lot of you who know lots about the Porsche brand will know this is where they sort of say you can have the special sort of the GT3. Basically, you're getting a more mid-engined GT3 car here. In the GT4, they still hold a little bit back and say, no, if you want the ultimate Porsche, you need to go and get yourself a GT3 and GT3 RS. With the GT4 RS, they say, all right, fine. It's going to be a very low allocation that's just going to a certain number of dealers anyway, and they're going to be selling it probably to people that have already got a GT3 or a GT3 RS, or someone that's been on the wait list forever. So they open the door. Weight-wise, there's not a lot in it. You've got 1,415 kilograms officially as the lightest specification a GT4 can be, and 1,410 for the GT4 RS. So although the GT4 RS adds lots of lightweight components, it also adds lots of motorsport stuff, lots of additional carbon fiber bits. And although they all don't weigh much, they do add up. Okay, the RS is just the ultimate Cayman. Okay, it's one of, in many ways, I don't want to step on the toes of a GT3. I wouldn't say it's the ultimate Porsche, but some people feel that way, who've driven all of them. And they said, actually, because it's mid-engine, because of the balance, because it finally got the door unlocked to have the 500 horsepower engine, because it got everything, most sport derived on it, 9,000 RPM limit on the GT4 RS. It kind of became an ultimate car. Is a GT2 RS going to show it which way around the track? Yeah, of course it is, because that's a turbocharged, lightweight racing car. So you're moving the everything on even further. But this is why I say, for those of you who are sort of like, I want to do a track day, I might want to use it on the road. GT4, it doesn't get the 500 horsepower engine, but it still gets, one of the. I think. I don't know if they would have always done a GT4 RS. I'm tempted to say they would have, but they were definitely always going to do a GT4. It doesn't fully resolve the issues of the earlier GT4, of its sort of long gearing, but it makes efforts, I would say. Is there really a lot? I'm probably missing so many details that, you get PDK from... PDK comes in as an option from model year 2021. So the very, very first ones are manual. The front axle and the brakes are nicked off a GT3. So that's good. This is all in the GT4. Obviously, GT4 RS keeps all of this stuff and then turns it all up to 11. But I think we really start to talk about budget here. And I would say, If you just want to get yourself into a 4 litre and you're going to use it on the road, get a GTS. If you want as close as you can get to sort of a mad Porsche car that is going to be wildly fun most of the time that you're using it, with a few compromises that the GTS doesn't have, go for a GT4. If you want the ultimate of everything, and having a wild 9,000 RPM limit is where your life is at, then go for a GT4 RS if the budget stretches that far. But there's not that many of them. Porsche didn't officially, they didn't number them, and they didn't sort of give them an official sort of, we're only going to build X amount, but they did allocate them to dealers. And so, getting hold of them is just difficult, and you're going to really pay a price premium. But that's probably just as true on the GT4, if I'm honest. So, you do see that horsepower, by the way. So 3.9 second 0 to 62 run on the GT4, 3.2 second. These are the fastest, by the way, because obviously you go for a manual, it's going to be slightly slower. It actually knocks the regular GT4 into the 4 seconds if you go for a manual. Okay, 4.4. Whereas GT4 RS, 3.2 to 3.4 doesn't matter. That doesn't matter on the testing, which country, whatever. It's 3.4 is the absolute slowest that thing is going to hit 62 miles an hour from a standstill. So, you've got to really be considering here how fast that vehicle is going to be for the majority of people that get into it who haven't had something like this before. But so you're really going to pay for it. So my pick on this generation, the 4 litre GTS would be the one. If the budget didn't allow you to get into a 4 litre, I'd look at the 2.5 GTS or the S. The T, both the base model and the T, if the budget isn't there to go up to these, but you want the newest one you can get, go for them. You'll have lots of fun. But really, the pick of the bunch, if you can stretch to it, 4 litre GTS, and that's the car for the majority of you that aren't going to be tracking these cars week in, week out, and may have to park them outside or whatever else. That's the one where you're going to have a lot of fun. Once you get into the GT4s, that's where things start to really, as I say, you can turn up to any motor show there and people are going to be snapping pictures and paying a lot of attention to you. And if you go GT4 RS, everyone is going to be looking at you and wanting to sit on your car and all that sort of stuff. So be careful with that. There is one model left. I saved it till last just because it's a style edition of the Cayman. Okay, so it's the 2 litre turbo MA 2.20 engine, 300 horsepower, 5.1 second if you go for a PDK, 5.7 if you go for a manual, 0 to 60. So we've stepped out of the craziness of the sort of very top end of GT4s here and just gone to the sort of regular ones. And this gets some nice individual colouring. It has a lot of options thrown at it because it's sort of the run out. It's the very, very last of the regular Cayman. This is why I say that the regular Cayman, although it is never officially dropped, it sort of disappears from a lot of countries' options, and you've got to sort of insist on buying one because the T comes in 2020, and then 2023 for 2023 model year, the style edition comes in and just sort of offers a lot of options and a few, say, individual colours and things like that otherwise would just cost so much to put on the standard car. No one would do it. So sort of a snap back to reality there for a lot of you who are saying GT4 would be magnificent, but just too much. Okay. That's the whole guide. That's all of the Caymans. So if you want to watch the Boxsters, you can watch that one next. This is the first, I think, video in the new studio. So if you watch the old video, pretty sure that's in the old studio. If you enjoy the video, consider subscribing. There's lots more videos like these. There's lots of guides on the channel. There is a buyer's guide for first, second, and third generation Cayman. There is buyer's guides for the Macan and the Cayenne if you just want any Porsche model because you love them. Most of their competitors are also on the channel as well. There's a video just like this one for the BMW Z4. There's also guides for the BMW Z4 if that particularly takes your interest. But if you've enjoyed it, add a like, consider subscribing, and I shall see you in the next one.